I always assumed it was just my own paranoia, but the more I investigated it, the more it became obvious that it was worse than anything I originally imagined. This happened on the same street I used to work on about 5 years ago. Now, this was in a not-so-good part of Philadelphia, and the place had always given me the creeps. It just looked like it was harboring some sort of sinister secret. I should mention that I worked for an affordable mobile service provider in the city. My job was to cold call people whose contracts with our competitors were about to run out, and I'd offer them our cheaper service. It wasn't the greatest job, but it taught me a lot about sales and human nature, and it paid the bills. At the end of every workday, when I'd walk to my car, I would pass the abandoned building and I would try to peek through the windows, but the entire building was seemingly empty and unused except for the top floor. The top floor's light would always be on. I never saw anyone enter or leave that building, and the entire thing was falling apart. I was amazed it wasn't condemned by the city, but someone was clearly paying the rent or mortgage to be there. Despite it being in rough shape, it had to be expensive. It was a huge old building, and it even had the original stone gargoyle at the top that looked straight down at you. One night, I'd forgotten my phone at work, and I called my boss hoping he was still at the office, and thank goodness he was. So I headed to the office, and he was waiting outside with my phone in his hand. He gave me the phone, I thanked him and started walking back to my car. When I was almost there, I heard the most horrific screams coming from the top floor of the abandoned building. I was seriously freaked out, and I stood there and listened for a while. It sounded like someone was torturing this guy. You could hear the anguish and pain in his screams. Then he yelled, "No, please!" and the screaming continued for several minutes. Then it was completely silent. A few moments later, 2 men in sunglasses and suits burst through the front door. I started getting in my car, trying to be as nonchalant as possible. The 2 men immediately got into a black car with dark windows that was parked across the street, and they took off down the road. I sat in my car for a while trying to regain my composure, and eventually drove home. When I got home that night, I tried to give myself a reasonable explanation for the screams. Maybe the guy's wife was divorcing him over the phone. Maybe someone he loved dearly died in a tragic way. But I knew those were far-fetched thoughts and that there was no rationalizing the sound of those cries. It had to be severe physical pain, and I can only imagine that the man probably died. The 2 suited men were clearly torturous murderers. I just hoped they didn't come back for me to eliminate the witness. I tried to forget about it and go to sleep, but that guy's screams weighed heavily on me. I wondered if I should call the cops, but I've seen plenty of movies about what happens to the guy that calls the cops after witnessing a murder. I didn't know what to do and was completely freaked out. I decided to go back and sit down at a 24-hour diner that was very near the creepy building and see if anything else went down that night. I got a coffee and a sandwich and sat by the window to see if I could make out any details of that top floor. The light was still on and I could see some movement in there, but that's about it. Suddenly, the same black car pulled up and parked right in front of the diner. The 2 men, still in suits and sunglasses, got out. But this time, they walked into the restaurant. I was in shock, and now really wishing I just stayed at home. The waitress asked them to follow her, but one of the men said that they were going to sit at the table next to me and asked for 2 coffees. The waitress went into the back, and the 2 men never did sit, and they proceeded to stand right next to my table. I just stared at my coffee and tried to pretend that I didn't see them. Finally, one of them tapped me on the shoulder and threw an envelope on the table. "You didn't hear anything tonight, did you?" I couldn't speak. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. The guy cleared his throat and said, "I need to hear you say it." I looked at the men and said, "I didn't hear anything." The 2 guys sat down across from me at my booth, looked right at me. "You didn't tell anybody about hearing nothing tonight, did you?" I was shaking, but I tried to look as normal as possible. I said, "Absolutely not. Nothing to tell, nobody to tell it to." Both guys then laughed, and one of them threw a business card at me. He said, "Give me a call sometime, kid." The card was just a phone number, with no names or words on it at all. They then got up from my booth, and one of them pointed to the envelope. "That's your first one," he said, and they both sat down at their booth. I immediately put money down on the table for the coffee and sandwich, said bye to the men in suits, and walked out of the restaurant as nonchalantly as possible. As soon as I thought I wasn't in eyeshot anymore, I sprinted the rest of the way to my car. When I got home, I opened the envelope and there was $5,000 in cash inside. I immediately quit my job at the mobile service provider, moved out of my apartment within 2 weeks, and eventually found another one on the other side of the city. I haven't told many people about this, and it's been a while now since it happened. But still, I've never been to that part of Philly since. I was really freaked out by this, and I hope everyone listening learns from my experience. There are some places you shouldn't go after dark. I was camping with my friends a few weeks ago, a guy's weekend at Killiansburg Cave campground. That's on the C&O Canal in Sharpsburg, Maryland. I moved here from Maine in junior high, and me and my friends have all been in and out of these caves a million times before. Not the big touristy ones. I'm talking about the ones that haven't been turned into attractions. This area has a lot of small caves, and if you grew up here, you'd know that's a primo place to party. We're all freshmen in college now, and even though we go to different schools from each other, we still try to hang out at least once during the summer. Killiansburg Cave Campground is a good place to get together because it's off-road. You have to hike in over a mile from the nearest parking lot. Plus, you can have a group of tents at one site. So that's why we chose it. Everything was going great until my buddy Tim started getting antsy. We were all sitting around the fire drinking beer just before 10 that night. I was okay with staying right where I was, because me and my friend Richie had brought our mountain bikes and we'd been out all afternoon. I was a little beat, but it felt good to hang out and just chill. Tim started talking about the good old days and how we used to party in Killiansburg Cave years ago. It's not a seriously huge cave, but it has a cool history. During the Civil War, a bunch of townspeople hid out in there when the battle came to Sharpsburg. Since the cave hasn't been made into a commercial attraction, you can go explore it by yourself for free. We used to skip school sometimes and hang out in there and get drunk. The cave is about a half-mile away from the campsite, maybe less, so after Tim went on about it for a few minutes, he managed to convince Brian and Richie. I didn't want to just sit there by myself, so I went along with it. We threw some beer into a day pack and headed down the trail. The moon was about half full, and it was plenty bright, but we had 2 flashlights with us just in case. It only took about 10 minutes or so to get there, and no one else was around. The cave opening is pretty tall, maybe 20 feet high, or just under, and it slopes downhill on the inside. It's not that big, really, even though the old stories make it sound like thousands of people hid out in there. So we get inside and Richie passes out the beer. Brian lit up a cigarette and we just chilled for a while, talking about nothing mostly, just hanging out. Then, of course, Tim gets all fidgety and grabs one of the flashlights, walking around, checking things out. I didn't pay him much attention until I heard a cracking sound. We all turned around and Tim was at the back of the cave, smacking a big rock against the wall. Brian asked him what the hell he was doing, and Tim said he could see another passage through a hole in the wall. We've all been in there like a million times before, and I've never seen anything but the one room, so I thought he was imagining it. I went over to where he was whacking the rock and took a look myself. He was right. There was a big crack where part of the wall had crumbled since the last time we'd been there. It was a small opening, but you could see where it opened up on the other side. Tim lifted up his rock to whack it again, but Brian had a better idea. He thought there was probably another entrance hidden in the brush on the outside, where the cave wall kind of rounded a curve. There's another cave nearby called Snyder's, which has 3 separate openings, so he made a good point. And it sounded way better than Tim smacking a rock against a wall and maybe bringing the ceiling down on us. We decided to take a look. We left the backpack with the leftover beer right there on the cave floor, since we weren't planning to go far. Tim took one of the flashlights and I grabbed the other, and all four of us started exploring the rock face to the right of Killiansburg Cave, pushing aside the bushes and stuff, looking for another entrance. In a minute, there's a tunnel at the back. It probably leads to the main cavern. I could see Tim's light shining into this dark tunnel. Then all of a sudden, the beam reflected on twin circles, shining yellow. Animal eyes. I yelled to him, saying, "There's something in the tunnel," but he'd already seen it. Holy cow! Tim spun back around, scrambling to get out of the cave. His flashlight shone right in my eyes for a second, blinding me. Then my blood just froze because I heard him scream. I stumbled back, blinking my eyes, really freaking out because I couldn't see anything but spots for a second. I couldn't run if I had to. I was afraid Tim was getting mauled by a bear. My eyes started working again, and I saw Tim was okay. He was squeezing back through the opening with Brian and Richie helping him, pulling him through. Tim's eyes were terrified. I've never seen him look so scared. We all started talking at once, asking what had happened, but he just turned and shone his light back through the opening. His hand was shaking. "I don't know. Something grabbed me," he said. Something was in that tunnel, and when I turned my back on it, it grabbed my sweatshirt, almost pulled me off my feet. "Was it a—" Richie started to say, but then I hushed him, shining my light inside, with Tim's. Caught in the twin beams, you could see some sort of creature. It had come out of the tunnel, and now it was watching us. I moved my light up to its face and almost dropped my flashlight. It looked like the boogeyman from a little kid's nightmare. It wasn't human, but it stood like a man on two legs. Its head looked like a goat's head, but bigger and longer, with yellow snake eyes and curving horns. Its neck was long, like a horse's, but its body was more like a lizard. A really big lizard. I would guess it weighed over 100 pounds. The way the light reflected on it made me think it had scales. Then it shifted sideways, and I saw the wings. Folded down wings like a bat. Wings, horns, a sulfur smell. I'm not superstitious, but this creature had to be some sort of demon. "We got to get out of here now!" I yelled and started running down the path. I didn't care if they followed or not. That thing was definitely not from this earth. Everyone had seen at least a glimpse of it just then, so no one argued. No one mentioned the beer we'd left in the main cave. We just hauled ass for the campsite. It wasn't until we got back to our site and lit the lanterns that we noticed Tim's jacket. On the fold of the hood, the cloth was shredded, like something had clawed it. He took it off and we all examined it, not realizing until that moment what a close call he'd had. None of us slept that night, and we didn't drink any more beer. We just sat around the campfire, keeping watch. I told my girlfriend about it, and she thinks it was the Jersey Devil, even though we're in Maryland. I never used to believe in any of those creature stories, but there's something there, all right? Something's living in the caves near Sharpsburg, Maryland. I'll never go in there at night again. Back in the day, I lived in a small town in southwestern Ohio, and I used to like to explore some of the abandoned buildings in the oldest part of town, and we saw some really wild stuff. The craziest experience we had, though, and the reason we stopped exploring, happened in this abandoned church a block or two up from the railroad tracks. On that day, there were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls. We brought our usual tools for gathering paranormal evidence, but this time we brought a Ouija board and some other random items with us as well. Things like a deck of cards, a yo-yo, and a compass. This was 1978, mind you, and I honestly wasn't the biggest believer in the spirit world, but I did enjoy the ambiance of it all and watching my friends get freaked out. But I became a believer the night we went into that church. This church was well over 100 years old. Built in the 1800s and was falling apart. We broke the lock on it, which wasn't really all that hard, and stepped inside. We were planning on spending the whole night there. We all climbed onto the dusty old church pews, and after a bit of coughing and sneezing, sat in silence to see if we could pick up on anything. My friend Eddie sensed some energy, but the rest of us didn't feel much of anything. Honestly, Eddie thought just about everything was haunted. We lit some candles around the sanctuary to start things up. We started asking questions in the church to get some activity moving. We called out to the congregation, the priest, the choir members, anything we could think of. None of us were the church-going type, so we did the best we could to think of things to ask. And then, when we asked if there were any children in there, one of the candles went out. We looked at each other with a bit of surprise, as I don't think any of us were really expecting anything to happen. And then we shifted our focus to trying to communicate with the children. Christina pulled the yo-yo out of her bag and sat it on the piano, and we all moved back from it. I asked, "Children, would you like to play?" The yo-yo moved around a bit, which was enough for Eddie, of course, to freak out. But the rest of us weren't totally convinced, and we wanted something a little more solid. It was an old building. It could have been anything that moved it. My friend Christina asked, "Children, was that you who moved the yo-yo?" As soon as she said that, the yo-yo fell off the piano. Now that was pretty freaky. Eddie was ready to leave, but the rest of us wanted to stay there and get as much evidence as possible that this was real. We kept asking questions in the main room for a while, but all of the movement had stopped. So we decided to split up and explore around the other rooms a bit. Eddie stayed in the sanctuary. Christina went into the kitchen in the basement. Ashley went into the basement, and I went into the priest's office. The office was creepy, especially with just the light from my flashlight. I went over to the old desk and sat down in his chair. I wiped off the dust from the desk and started looking through the drawers. There was a Bible, a notebook, some writing utensils, and a bunch of papers. The Bible was pretty cool, and I thought to myself that I'd be able to use it as an object to incite some activity on future adventures. The notebook had writings in it about the consequences of sins and several Bible notes to drive the point home. It was a strange thing to read, really, but my thoughts were soon interrupted when I heard Ashley scream. I stopped what I was doing and headed into the kitchen. When I asked her what happened, she said that something threw a glass at her. We shined our flashlights down at the ground and saw the shattered glass all over the floor. We started snapping pictures all around the broken glass to see if we could capture some orbs. We then got the Ouija board out of my backpack and put it down on the ground and lit some candles around it. If something was powerful enough to throw a glass, it was probably powerful enough to communicate with us as well. We kept asking for the children, but there was no activity coming from the Ouija board. We began asking it questions about the kitchen, the glass, if someone didn't like Ashley, etc. No activity whatsoever. But when we were about to move on to another room and try there, one of the candles went out. This also happened to be the candle closest to a cross that was hanging on the wall. We asked it what it wanted, and finally the Ouija board moved and spelled out Bible. I instantly thought of the Bible I had just seen and ran back to the priest's office, grabbed everything, and ran back into the kitchen. I placed the Bible next to the Ouija board. We started asking whatever was talking to us through the board, religious questions. Is there a God? Is there an afterlife? What is our purpose in life? What happens when we die? These didn't incite any activity. Nothing moved at all in response. So I went over to the notebook and started reading off the writings on the pages. Suddenly, the Ouija board moved to 3, then 1, then 4. I looked down at the notebook and saw Genesis 3:14. Eddie flipped the Bible open to the passage and read it aloud. So the Lord God said to the serpent, "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life." It was at this point we were all freaked out and figured it was best to get out of there. We started to gather up everything we brought in and started heading out of the church. And that's when another glass smashed behind us in the kitchen, and we ran. As soon as we got out of the church and to the bottom of the front steps, we stopped to catch our breath. Before anyone could say anything, we heard what sounded like a music box playing and children laughing, coming from inside the front doors. We got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. After a night like this, there was no more denying the existence of the paranormal for me. The places we visited before that night, we might have gotten a few pieces of evidence, but that church was absolutely haunted. The yo-yo falling, the glasses being thrown, the Ouija board spelling Bible, and then Genesis 3:14. That was by far the most evidence we got from a single location, and it was all in a matter of 4 hours. To this day, I always wonder if we stayed there, would we have gotten hurt? Later, once we developed the pictures and looked them over, we all agreed that we had captured a couple of orbs in the kitchen. I was honestly surprised we didn't capture anything else, though. I mean, I was half expecting to see a demon's face somewhere based on everything that happened. I guess, in a way, I'm happy we didn't. So I recently moved back to Philly for a job. I'm a few blocks down from my parents' place. My mom and dad are getting up there in years, so I've been spending a lot of time helping them fix some things in their house. Now, a problem my parents have had for as long as I can remember is getting the trash truck to come. Half the houses on their block have been either abandoned or condemned by the city. And the sanitation department will sometimes take their house off the trash route by accident. It's a headache, and it means trash can pile up on our sidewalk for weeks sometimes. So what happened was, about 2 months ago, garbage started piling up again. And to make matters worse, we were throwing out more junk than usual because of the repairs, so our sidewalk was cluttered, and our bins were full. One morning, my dad gets up and sees that one of the trash bins was destroyed. My parents used those heavy-duty bins with the animal locks to keep the raccoons out. But this bin had its lid completely ripped off, and everything inside had spilled onto the street. My dad was so upset. That particular can had been used for our kitchen garbage, so it had old leftovers and food scraps. We figured maybe an animal smelled it and it was too good to pass up. I was annoyed, but I didn't think too much of it. None of us did. It was just a trash can, so it wasn't that big a deal. But then our trash bins kept getting broken into, even when they were pulled off the street and it wasn't trash day. And some of them had dents like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them. Of course, any bags we left out for pickup on pickup day were ripped open. Our street smelled and looked disgusting on those days. When the trash guys came, it was so bad they couldn't even collect anything. Those guys weren't picking stuff up off the street. This went on for roughly a few weeks, and my mom had had enough. She was completely fed up. She kept asking the neighbors if they had seen anything or anyone out there, and they all said no. At that point, she thought maybe someone had it out for us and was trying to send a message. She called the sanitation department to ask for extra pickups, and they said no, their trucks weren't available to do that. So it looked like no one was going to help us fix this. So I decided to go to the store and get one of those motion sensor floodlights. I got it, I set it up, and I put it on the house above the sidewalk in front of the house. It was pointed at the trash cans. So my dad and I decided to stay up on a Friday night and see if we could catch the culprit. And around midnight, we heard the first noise. We heard a crash, and we both saw the floodlight turn on, and we could see that the noise was coming from one of the trash cans. Something huge and furry was tearing into it. I hoped the spotlight would scare it away, but it didn't budge. It was too dark to see anything else except the animal's silhouette, but I knew that it had to be bigger than I was. Everything about it just seemed big and muscular. It looked like it could tear apart anything it wanted to. I didn't want to go out there, and neither did my dad. But we had to do something. My dad grabbed a block of wood that was still inside from the repairs, opened the door, and chucked it at the animal as hard as he could. It barely moved when it got hit, but it did look up. And I'm telling you, it had the face of a dog. One of those skinny, mean ones, too. Its eyes even reflected the light like a dog's. My dad picked up another block and threw it, and this time the animal ran off down the street. We closed the door and waited. When we were absolutely sure that it wasn't coming back, we went outside to inspect the damage. Everything smelled like urine and sulfur. And now that we knew what we were up against, things started to make sense. It liked our kitchen trash the best. Even though it obviously wasn't one, it seemed to eat like a raccoon. It was a scavenger. The next day, I picked up some rat poison. Before, we'd been hesitant to use it because we didn't want to accidentally kill someone's pet. But now, we just wanted to drive the creature away without getting hurt ourselves. Over the next 2 days, I mixed the poison in with our garbage, and I made sure to sleep over at my parents' house just in case. We set the trash out for the night, turned the floodlights on, and hoped for the best. Everything was a mess in the morning, just like we expected. We figured we wouldn't be able to tell if our plan worked for at least a few days. So when I set our garbage out again a few days after that, I worried that I'd find the same thing as before. But nothing was touched. Our bins were fine, and this time all was exactly where I'd left them. And it's been like that ever since. Either this creature moved on or he's dead. Either way, he's gone from our house. I don't tell many people this story, but something wild happened to me and my friends when we were camping one night. My buddies and I would throw these raging house parties back in the day. I was a DJ, and I had this amazing sound setup that used to tear the house down. I'm talking about a huge high-end PA system that would get loud enough for a stadium. I had all kinds of crazy lights, fog machines, and visual effects that would turn any dingy apartment into an instant rave. My buddy Jeff could whip out professional quality drinks at an amazing rate. My man Kyle had this omelet station and would whip out the most delicious breakfast foods all night long. Casey was our other roommate, and she was always the life of the party. The morning after one of the craziest parties we've ever thrown, the four of us were in awful shape. We all desperately needed to recuperate, but many of the partygoers were planning on showing up again. So we figured that we would just head out and go camping deep in the woods and hide out for a while. We gathered all our supplies and headed on down the road. We found a nice secluded spot in the middle of the woods and set up a sweet campsite. We ended up having such a good time that night that we figured we'd stay the whole weekend. The last night, we were grilling some hot dogs around the fire, relaxing and just having the best time. Suddenly, we heard this whooping noise coming from the forest. We thought we had been completely alone all weekend, so this freaked us all out. After sitting and listening for a while, Kyle got up and grabbed a flashlight. "Come on, let's find whatever's out there," he said, as he headed towards the sounds. "Let's just get out of here," Casey said, taking off after Kyle. Jeff and I looked at each other and headed off after them, flashlights in hand. We slowly crept through the woods towards the whooping sounds. As the sounds got louder, we turned off our flashlights and snuck closer. We saw the fire from a campsite peeking through the trees and slowly made our way towards the light. What we saw horrified us. There were naked human-like things with unnaturally white skin, large black eyes, and skinny long limbs. They were jumping around the fire, whooping and shouting. There must have been 20 of them. One of us stepped on a branch and they all went silent and looked right at us. All four of us took off back towards our campsite, screaming and panicking. Whatever those things were started whooping and shouting at us as they chased us back to the campsite. "Run! Come on, let's go!" We screamed at each other. We left everything we had brought and sprinted towards the van. We all climbed in and shouted at Casey to start the van up. She patted her pockets and froze. She had left the keys at the campsite. We locked the doors and looked in the direction the creatures were coming from. The whooping and shouting got louder and louder, and then it was silent. We watched for a while and didn't see any of the creatures anymore. We had to go back and get the keys. There was no way around it. It was too dangerous and too far to try to leave the forest on foot. That was a truly terrifying walk back. The forest was dead quiet. We got back to our campsite and looked around. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We searched for the keys for a while, and finally Casey found them in her sleeping bag. We pretty much left everything we brought and ran towards the van. We all piled in the van and Casey started it up. The headlights came on, and we saw the creatures had us surrounded. All of them stood equal lengths apart from each other and stared right at us. They all looked dead and emotionless. We thought we were about to die. After a couple of tense minutes, Casey rolled down the window and shouted, "We're leaving now. We're never coming back. We'll never speak of this. Just let us go." None of them moved at all, and we just sat there. Suddenly, Casey slammed the van in gear and floored it straight towards the road ahead. We were about to hit one of the creatures ahead, and we were all screaming our heads off. As the car got towards it, the creature bent backward, and the van didn't even scratch it. We sped off, and I looked back at all the creatures just blankly staring at us, make a beeline down the road. As we approached the exit, we could see the creatures looking down at us from the top of the trees. I thought they were going to jump down and kill us, but we made our way safely onto the highway and never saw them again. My life has calmed down a lot since those days, thankfully. My children have asked me several times to take them camping, but I haven't been in the woods since this experience. I honestly don't think I'll ever go camping again, as I have post-traumatic stress from this incident. My college friends and I have fallen out of touch, but writing this down has inspired me to try to reach back out to them. I want to see how their lives turned out and what they think of that night all these years later. I don't know what those creatures were, but I know they weren't human, and I know I never want to see them ever again. In hindsight, as soon as we heard the whooping noises, we should have gotten out of there immediately. But at least I have this crazy story to tell, and we all made it out of there alive. I wonder how many people have encountered these creatures and not lived to talk about them.